Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of our three-part speaker series, We Shall Not Be Silent, a conversation on race in America presented by Tzedek LaKol, Justice for All, and Congregation Shirat Hayam. My name is Barbara Sidman, and this is my husband, Alan Sidman, and we are the co-chairs of Tzedek LaKol. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that today is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, by offering this prayer and lighting a candle in memory of those who perished in the Holocaust.
Taken from a prayer by Rabbi David Cates. O Lord, on this most solemn of occasions, we open our hearts, minds, and souls to you. As we remember the 6 million, the 11 million, the indifference and the evil, as we honor the heroes, the martyrs, the survivors, and the victims. Above all, we pray for shalom, for wholeness and peace, to be in our midst now and forever. Please answer our prayers and bring us a world devoid of hatred, filled instead with peace. Amen.
For those who are joining us from across the North Shore and beyond, we want to introduce ourselves as conveners of tonight's space. Located in Swampscott, Massachusetts, Congregation Shirat Hayam offers multiple pathways to Jewish life, learning, and prayer so that all may feel welcomed and connected and enriched.
Tzedek LaKol, Justice for All, is a Shirat Hayam member-led group that organized in October of 2020 in response to ongoing issues of racial and social justice facing our country. We focus on achieving racial and social justice within our congregation and community, and are committed to collaborating with others through action and educational programs, confronting injustices and pursuing equal and equitable rights for all.
Tonight marks the launch of our first initiative, a three-part speaker series called We Shall Not Be Silent, Conversations on Race. Our series focuses and centers these necessary conversations by examining racism and racial justice through national, Jewish, and local lenses. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Tonight's event will include 30 to 45 minutes of discussion, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of audience questions and answers. Attendees may submit their questions using the Q&A function in the webinar. Questions will be screened by a member of our committee and provided to Representative Ehrlich to ask during the Q&A session. This event is being recorded and streamed live on Shirat Hayam's Facebook page. The recording will also be posted to the Shirat Hayam website after the event. Without further ado, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Representative Lori Ehrlich. A Shirat Hayam member, Lori has proudly represented the 8th Essex District in the Massachusetts Legislature since March 2008. Lori, we're honored to have you here with us to lead this important conversation tonight.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you, Barbara and Alan, for that lovely prayer and introduction. And thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your evening to join us for what I'm sure will be a thoughtful and important conversation. My name is Lori Ehrlich. Many of you know me. For everybody who is on the North Shore and around the region, welcome. I look forward to exploring this topic with you. I'd like to begin this evening's program with a quote from Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, and I found it particularly appropriate. He said, quote, "I always knew that deep down in every human, there is mercy and generosity. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Tonight's event is an expression of both learning and love as we gather for an essential community conversation about race in America. I honor the vision and initiative of the Tzedek LaKol, which translates into Justice for All committee. And the members of the committee include Barbara and Alan Sidman, who you just met, Jerry and Patricia Kreitzer, Joel Green, Keiko Zoll, Beverly Kahn, and with an assist from Barry Stein, and of course, Rabbi Michael Rogozin at Congregation Shirat Hayam in Swampscott, where my family belongs. So to kick off the discussion, I feel I feel this moment is something we must recognize. The past few years have certainly been an emotional roller coaster for us all. Together, we struggled through a deadly pandemic that claimed the lives of over 500,000 Americans and wiped out employment for many millions more. Isolation and insecurity have taken their toll on all of us, robbing us of actual loved ones and tearing at the fabric of our communities. Unfortunately, adding to these challenges for many has been a well-documented resurgence of white supremacy. As we commemorate Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day, we are reminded of the dangers of indifference and inaction. We cannot sit by. For Black Americans, this time has been particularly difficult. After the brutal killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black Americans at the hands of police, we saw some of the biggest protests in American history, including right here in our own communities. This moment is a reckoning. It's forcing us to confront structural racism that is deeply embedded in our nation's institutions. It will take open hearts, which we all bring tonight, deep learning, and hard work to reverse and bring about enduring change. In Massachusetts, I'm proud that we have recently continued that work by passing a strong new policing reform law and statutorily defining environmental justice in the landmark environmental bill just signed into law. Of course, there is more work to be done. More locally this past year, our community has found itself the focus of intense weekly protests and counter-protests featuring symbols of hate and white supremacy. The organizers of tonight's event deserve credit for seeing this as a teachable moment and a chance to grow together. We are still in the midst of this complicated time, and there is much to discuss. So I could not be more excited to be joined tonight by such a good friend and a wonderful human being for a fireside chat. So allow me to introduce him to you all. Originally from the south side of Chicago, Deval Patrick was awarded a scholarship at the age of 14 to attend Milton Academy through the Boston-based organization A Better Chance. After Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he clerked for a federal appellate judge and then launched a career as an attorney and business executive, becoming a staff attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, assistant attorney general for civil rights in the Clinton administration, a partner at 2 Boston law firms, and a senior executive at 2 Fortune 50 companies. In 2006, in his first bid for elective office, he became Massachusetts' first African-American governor. During his 8-year tenure, Patrick helped to revive a battered economy through the expansion of affordable healthcare, unprecedented investments in Massachusetts public schools and public infrastructure, and initiatives stimulating clean energy and biotechnology. Under his leadership, Massachusetts extended healthcare to over 98% of its residents, won a national race to the top educational grant, steered the state to a 25-year high in employment, not unemployment, and ranked first in the nation in student achievement, energy efficiency, veteran services, and entrepreneurship. From April 2015 to December 2019, he founded and built an impact investment fund at Bain Capital, where he focused on investments that deliver both a competitive financial return and significant positive social impact. He continues to invest in stakeholder models of mission-driven business as a senior advisor to Bain Capital and a board member. He is the founder and chairman of Together Fund, a political action committee to support progressive politics and grassroots groups working to drive turnout and engagement among disenfranchised and marginalized voters. He continues this work as co-chair of American Bridge 21st Century through its Bridge Together initiative. And lastly, Patrick is a Rockefeller Fellow, a Crown Fellow of the Aspen Institute, and the author of 2 books, A Reason to Believe, Lessons from an Improbable Life, and Faith in the Dream, A Call to the Nation to Reclaim American Values. He lives in Western Massachusetts with his wonderful wife, Diane, his dogs, and his bees. Welcome, Governor. It's so nice to see you.
Good to be with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as a frequent visitor to the North Shore, when you were governor, I hope we can have you out here again in person. But for now, thank you so much for joining us virtually.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. Although I had second thoughts about being invited to be a centerpiece in one of the most difficult conversations America is having and has been having over, more than 2 centuries now.
Yeah, no, I know it does. To stand up and have this conversation isn't necessarily easy, but it's as important as it is difficult. So I honor your courage for joining us tonight.
Yours, and thanks to Barbara and Alan and to Shirat Hayam and to Tzedek LaKol. Did I say it right?
Yes,
okay.
You did.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. All right. So for our discussion, if it's okay with you, I would like to just ask you a few questions that I hope can serve as prompts. And I have no doubt that wisdom and reflections will come forth.
Oh God, you're dialing up the pressure here.
Okay, so let's start with this question. The title of your book is true. Your story is truly improbable and extraordinary indeed, and an inspiration to us all. At this moment when young people are so engaged as they struggle with the nexus of politics and their future, your story has the power to lift and inspire, especially young people of color, into a life of civic engagement. As one of the nation's most successful Black elected officials and a leader in the private sector, what do you hear from young people about race in America? And what advice or thoughts do you share with them based on your own life?
Well, first of all, I think when I do have a lot of conversations with young people, known and total strangers who reach out, and I try to engage as often as I can, because I think that kind of engagement was so meaningful to me when I was coming up. But I find myself mainly listening, because sometimes the question is, I am here and I want to be where you are or where you were, and I have to acknowledge that my life has not followed a straight line. I've zigged and zagged, and I'm terrible about giving people advice about how you plot a course over 50 years or 40 years of professional life. I'm very interested in what their aspirations are, and what are the ways in which they limit themselves. And by that I mean, sometimes I will hear from folks from my alma mater at Harvard, and they are all in knots about whether to go to this fancy graduate school or that fancy firm of one kind or another, and whether that choice is going to make the next choice they want more or less probable. And it's like, you get to go to places like this so that you have choices. Make one. It's not the last choice. Just make one, and try to decide what it is you want to contribute, not just what you want to gain, but what you want to contribute and where your values lead. I try to say to people to be mindful, particularly to young Black people and young Black men. Be mindful that we are not where we need to be, but we are also not where we were. And that's a hard thing, I think, in America. We have a real hard time holding in equipoise the reality that extraordinary progress has been made, by the way, much of it in my lifetime. At the same time, we have so much work to do. I also try to say to folks, be impatient, because frankly, it was that same kind of impatient against extraordinary odds that created impatience, that created that momentum over the decades. And I frankly love what I see right now, which it feels like a younger generation has put its collective foot down and said, we're just not going to accept the way things have been anymore. And then third, I try to make the point about the importance of building bridges. I think this is a hard one for people to hear now. There's a, wonderful line I heard in a speech at the Obama Foundation Summit years ago by an extraordinary reporter who was talking about these days of being woke. And he said his biggest concern is whether the woke were going to leave room for the still waking. And I think that's such a profoundly important idea, because sometimes we often think of ourselves as being, as more evolved than anyone else, any given individual on this or that subject. And if someone doesn't agree with me, it's because they're not as involved, when in fact they may. This is what culture is, right? Having the same set of information and coming to different conclusions. So I think if we want a just society where everyone has a place, then I'm not saying tolerate the haters. That's not what I'm saying. But there are an awful lot of people who are not as woke, as it were, who don't have the same life experience, have different life experience, have different concerns and anxieties, and they need to be heard and respected, and their perspectives absorbed in the same way we want ours to be. And I say that mindful that Black people are by no means monolithic. We have a whole range of views too.
That's a great answer. I think that actually feeds into the next question very well. This may be more about your work with your PAC currently. As part of a national political strategy, dozens of restrictive voting rights bills have been filed in state legislatures across the country. Stacey Abrams has sounded the alarm, dubbing them Jim Crow 2.0, for the impact they will have on voters of color. Just this week, in a way we have not really seen since 2006's reauthorization of the Voter Rights Act, corporations such as Major League Baseball, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines have really stood up to take a stand against the now law in Georgia. More tentatively for now, and perhaps not yet woke, other corporations are beginning to speak out in Texas and in other places. I'm curious what you see as, you've worked in a corporate environment, you've worked in in government for sure too. What do you see as the responsibility of key stakeholders to keep such fundamental issues as our democracy at the forefront and to prompt meaningful action?
Well, a couple of things I would say. I think on difficult and complex political issues, companies are understandably reluctant to engage. And I get that. I thought Michael Jordan said it in a kind of harsh way years ago when he said, something like Republicans buy Nike shoes as well, or something like that. He was some reason why he wasn't engaging in some partisan thing. But I think when it comes to questions of the fundamentals of our democracy and what kind of society we mean to be, it has become harder and harder for companies to simply stand by and await the outcomes. And I think employees are driving some of this. I think customers are driving some of this. We are a very consumer-oriented economy, as you know, and those kinds of, to say nothing of the allyship, if that's the right term, of business leaders. But you mentioned Coca-Cola and Delta. but it was the former CEO of American Express and the CEO of Merck, both African-American men, who started this call. And I will say, in the case of Georgia, it just makes you wonder what the outcome might have been in the legislature. I'm not sure it would have been different if we'd heard publicly as clearly from these companies and from MLB before the law was passed and signed into law by the governor. That may make a difference in Texas. But there is this question about just who are we? Are we? We have projected ourselves as the world's greatest democracy. We have been election observers around the world and been the ones who have done thumbs up or thumbs down about whether the election was fair and open. We are held up, and we hold ourselves up as a model of democracy. For much of that time and today, our democracy has been incomplete. And when you hear, and I say this, I mean, Laura, Representative, I'm a proud Democrat, but I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. That to me is silly. But at the national level, at least, and in some states, it's beginning to feel as if Republican strategy is girded on this notion that they couldn't actually win a fair fight, that a contest of ideas wouldn't work. And that requires some examination, I think, and some calling out. So it would seem to me, especially in light of the paucity of evidence of actual voter fraud, that we'd be trying to encourage legislatures to go in the opposite direction and to make voting as easy and straightforward and accessible for people as possible. And by the way, I'll just say it at the end, I want to acknowledge that a business leader in Massachusetts, Peter Palangin, has been leading some work starting back in at the last election cycle to encourage companies to give time to their employees with pay, if that's what's necessary for them to be able to get to the polls. So as a practical matter, that reminds me to say, we need to overwhelm these obstacles in the same way we undertook to do in the special election in Georgia and elsewhere. That's part of what I'm trying to do through American Bridge now.
Yeah, it seems like George is in the midst of a struggle. It was blue for a little while, and that there's definitely some tension in Georgia. So it's nice to see a willingness of companies to actually take a stand on something so fundamental as making sure that everybody gets a vote. Okay, so next question I have for you. Last year saw some of the biggest protests and civil actions in the country's history following the murder of George Floyd. These protests really shined a light on systemic racism in our country and the urgent need for police reform. I'm proud to have joined my colleagues, as I mentioned before, in Massachusetts state government in recent months to pass a sweeping policing reform bill into law. But beyond policing, where do you see the need for systemic change?
This is so hard because we are talking about lots of things we have learned to take for granted for generations. When I was doing civil rights litigation at LDF, we used to comment on how we were working and litigating to integrate the schools because the adults wouldn't integrate the neighborhoods. That's why we had to integrate the schools. And I would say generally, if you step back and think about it, especially over the last maybe 40 years, we have made our peace, if uneasy, with the concept of non-discrimination, but we have not resolved the question of integration. They're not the same thing. And I'm not talking about what courts require. I'm talking about the choices we make to lead integrated lives. I think some of that is enabled by policy, but it isn't all policy about race. I'll give you just one example. Housing and permitting zoning issues in Boston, for example, and elsewhere, maybe in Swampscott, the question of density, of affordability, what that actually means, workforce housing I'm talking about, and the connection between transportation and affordable housing. You know, we've talked at length about the importance of the South Coast Rail. By the way, folks, down to New Bedford and Fall River, connecting a population that needs jobs in the greater Boston area and where there are jobs in the greater Boston area, and connecting folks who have those jobs to affordable housing down the South Coast. They are connected. And when we talk about competing interests, and here's a hard one, North-South Rail Link, right? Terrific idea, terrific idea. But it means probably, or it may, that South Coast Rail is further delayed. Now, that's not all race. Some of that's, a lot of that is economics. But race and economics often interconnect. You understand what I'm saying? It's, I think what's hard is siloing things.
Right.
Yes, we should have reform of policing, conceptually and practically, in the training, in the hiring, and the rest. But we should also acknowledge that we've asked the police to do a whole bunch of things we used to ask social workers and folks in churches and synagogues to do, and communities to do as a whole. And so if we are going to ask the police to stick to crime fighting, as it were, and real crime fighting, not just wholesale suspicion of communities or people because of the way they look or where they are, then we have to also step up and make a place and make a way for the other services that are needed to build and strengthen communities. So it can't be one-off. Sentencing reform is another one, right? It's interesting. It was Republican governors when I was in office who were leading the move away from mandatory minimum sentencing for fiscal reasons, by the way, not necessarily reasons of justice, but that is the right direction, however you get there. And even in Massachusetts, when I was in office, we went some of the way, but not far enough. There are going to be things like that. There are issues around wealth creation, which is about trying to address some of these issues around income and wealth inequality. And in that respect, I would say I feel actually a little bit hopeful. And I'll say something that's may sound a little bit shocking, but I'm hopeful because the economic unease or insecurity, the social isolation, the sense of despair as measured by things like addiction rates or suicide rates. Those are things that many, many Black families and Black communities have been feeling for generations, but that people feel in all kinds of communities today. And there may be an opportunity by trying to speak to that and work at that, government and the private sector together, where we actually have an opportunity to build bridges as we are building solutions.
This is why your voice is so important. I mean, for somebody who served as governor, you didn't serve in a siloed way. Very often, in the legislature, we're organized in committees, so we tend to be focused, on certain silos. But to have that perspective, to see the big picture, just makes your voice and your perspective absolutely essential and so important for these times. So
I had good partners.
Yeah, we did a lot of good work. Okay, so next question. In recent years, the rise of social media has enabled people, especially young people, to organize and turn hashtags into large social and political movements. What role do you think social media plays in shifting public opinion on things like racism in criminal justice, healthcare, and economic justice. And how does social media activism transform into real, meaningful change?
Well, I think so. I guess I feel it's a double-edged sword. I know I will sound like a Luddite when I say this. You are exactly right that social media has proven its ability to organize large groups of here and abroad, by the way, around social movements, and that is a powerful thing. But it is also a haven for cowards. You know, you can slam somebody and never have to look them in the eye. You don't, to me anyway, and it's maybe it's apparent from how long-winded my responses are to your questions, that you know, kind of squeezing big issues or complex questions into, you know, sound bites has never been a strength of mine in any other media, let alone, so social media just, you know, underscores that weakness of mine. And, you know, frankly, I mean, you think about it. I remember I gave a graduation address at BU years ago about the rise of social media. I was talking about how, among other things, you know, you can break up with somebody on social media by text, but you can't fall in love.
Mm.
And I remember, I cite that because I think at bottom, and this will sound maybe a little too grand to some of the participants, we are talking about learning to love each other, love ourselves and love each other. And that is impossible without understanding and time and contact. And that, to me, seems to me exactly not what we get from social media. So, you know, if you can get it to a kernel of a thing, and it's all about showing up at such and such a place, social media is terrific. It can often be, and was, very useful in our campaigns, for example. But to engage at the level of understanding, even politically, around this notion that you don't have to agree on everything before you work together on anything, that's hard to do in that, for me anyhow, in social media.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I've been working for a few years on the crisis that local journalism is in right now, and shout out to I think we probably have some journalists in this seminar. But you know, to have our democracy function in a way we need it to, people have to be informed, and you know, sometimes, you know, social media, you know, can drown out what the real issues are. So there's lots of,
Well, and they have to get the truth.
right.
That's this is why I say it's a haven for cowards. You can hide behind not just the, you know, the shank, but misinformation too.
But I appreciate it as an organizing tool and a way of getting information out there, just like anybody with a campaign certainly can appreciate. But the stories still need to be told, and how we, you know, how our communities function. Nobody can go to every school committee meeting. Nobody can be everywhere, and we count on journalism for that. You know, but social media, I think, has its place. I'm a bit of a Luddite too, but I do thoroughly appreciate it from an organizing standpoint. But you're right. I think, you know, to fall in love and to really get to know each other, we have to be able to have conversations with each other, not little sound bites and inflammatory conversations. So, but you know, it's not going anywhere, and it does play a role. I think, you know, but I think we have to remain curious and make sure we get the stories still.
Right.
Okay, and this last question is just a little bit of an open-ended one that I thought you would be able to tell us a little bit about what you're up to. You've been so active on all of these issues for so many years. I'd love for you to fill us in on what you're working on now, and just reflect on how we can get the agenda right, what recommendations you might have
Wow.
for us to continue the work needed, which will finally result in substantive progress on racial equity, and maybe some advice on what actions individuals can take.
Oh, man, all of that?
It's a lot. Take your time.
So on what I'm doing now, I am a senior advisor back at Bain Capital, working on the mission capital project. Basically, we're on investing in mission-driven companies, purpose-driven companies, and really demonstrating that the notion of trading return for impact was a false notion all along. By the way, I think that movement is very much at the core of some of what's motivating the companies you cited at the top of our conversation, why they are feeling they have to have something to say about some of the more egregious issues of public moment. I am also working with Bridge Together at American Bridge 21st Century on how we fund a permanent grassroots infrastructure, because I think that the lesson of Georgia is not just the genius of Stacey Abrams in those 6 weeks of the special election. It was a decade of work by her and her allies, winning and losing local elections, but building community. So it was a civic undertaking and not just a political one. And I think the invitation to people who have checked out of politics and of civic life to check back in and see it as theirs is a powerful thing and needs to be sustained. So I'm working on that. And then I've joined the boards of a few mission-driven enterprises because I want to support them and encourage them, and they thought I had something to contribute. And I still read the political news a lot, but I don't read it with the same blood pressure I did once before, which is rather nice. In terms of the agenda, I think that we've touched on some of the policy agenda, but I will say that the just back to the question of voting rights, we probably are. We have to deal with the question of power. And like it or not, because of changing demographics, it's time to deal with the question of power. It isn't, the disenfranchisement in Georgia is one example. There was, you may remember at the midterms, the last time, so what is this, that would have been 2018. There was a popular referendum in Florida to restore the voting rights of former felons, which Florida took away permanently, by the way. And it won overwhelming support, bipartisan support. And the brand new Republican governor and the legislature, one of their first acts was to condition that not only had people to have finished their terms, but they had to pay whatever outstanding fine or restitution. And most of these people were poor and were not going to be able to do so. So it was all about taking away what was popularly granted. There's things like that. There's a purging movement on, and it is harder to maintain your voter registration in some places than it is your driver's license, which is ridiculous. Either it's a real democracy or it's not. And we have lots of other ways in which we can refresh the information on the rolls and assure that people who should be voting are the only ones who do. And the reason we don't is because there are real issues of power shifting. Last thing I'll say on that is the way we draw congressional and representative district lines. I will, kudos to the legislative committee the last time around. I'm forgetting now the name of the chair, but they did it in a very transparent way. They didn't leave politics aside, but it wasn't all about politics. There was some reason and rationale and sense to it, and there was general agreement at the end that it was the right plan. In an awful lot of places, the district lines are drawn in the most ridiculous way in order to disempower people who numerically ought to have power. And frankly, I think it contributes to the shrillness of the partisan debate, because if you don't actually have to answer to people who don't agree with you back home in order to keep your seat and absorb their points of view and try to, straddle, I'm not saying compromise away your principles or your convictions, but I mean, actually representing all of your constituents, then, why not go and just be a representative who's all about the performance art of the work and not the substance. So I think the agenda has to go beyond criminal justice reform, the economic issues and some of the ways that we've talked about, but also the issues of real democratic power.
Great answers. I've exhausted my questions, and boy, you have hit them all out of the park.
Oh, well, we'll
So
see.
thank you for your thoughtful responses. You're as wonderful as ever. And
Very kind.
I'm grateful that you're here sharing your wisdom from your extraordinary life. I would like to offer up a few questions from the audience, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I have received them in the chat, so I'm going to take them one at a time. This first question: is there a contradiction between saying systemic racism in America is real and saying, quote, "this is not who we are," end quote, when we talk about racism in America?
What a wonderful, wonderful question, and a hard one. On its face, I would say, yes, there is a contradiction. But the reason I think both ideas exist in equipoise or at the same simultaneously is that I would say this to the questioner: we are a nation of aspiration. Remember, we're the only nation in human history organized the way this nation is organized. Nations are usually organized around geography, religion, sometimes language. We were organized around a handful of civic ideals. I mean, think about it. And over time and through struggle, we've defined those ideals as equality, opportunity, fair play. That is, that I have lived those ideals. That's where my patriotism comes from and why it's so deep, because I know it's possible when we do what we need to do to make it possible. And in fits and starts, it's when we have been true to those ideals and really working to make, as Jefferson and President Obama would say, that more perfect union. Our power in the world has increased. And when we have retreated from that, our power in the world has decreased. So the notion that this is not who we are, I always hear to mean this is not who we were meant to be. Right. This is not who we set out to be. And I'll make one more kind of radical statement. Many of the framers, including Jefferson, a slaveholder himself, he knew what would happen. He foresaw what he was, the sort of match he was lighting. And if and he wrote about it. In fact, there was a wonderful line about to the effect that he trembles when he thinks that God is just. And it was about acknowledging the contradictions between the ideals to which the founders committed us and the realities in the political compromises made necessary to create the country in the first place. We've always been in struggle. But when that struggle yields to progress, it makes us, I think, a greater nation. And the notion that we could be a successful multi-ethnic democracy would make us, I think, invincible and a magnet for talent and inspiration and inspiration to people all over the world.
Very well said. Okay, so this next question, I think you have a slogan for this. So many public officials and citizens alike have offered words of hope time and time again. How do we all help inject a tangible belief that social and racial justice can actually be a part of our daily lives? It often seems so helpless, but deep down we must have hope.
Well, you're probably remembering what my grandmother used to say to us. She would always say, hope for the best and work for it. That hoping was not enough, you had to do stuff. And I think sometimes we think that the doing something is the grand gesture. But a lot of it is tiny personal acts of grace. I mean, my wife and I made a decision to live in an integrated community and to live integrated lives, to have all kinds of people around our dinner table, to make that a part of our children's expectation in their lives, and they have as well. And because we have experienced love across difference, it doesn't seem so scary to us. There are an awful lot of people who only know the other by what they think only think they know because of what they've read or the news or some isolated experience they have had. And I think my experience has taught me that we have angels and demons of every type and kind in every color and every shade of every color, and there is a kind of a beautiful risk taking that goes with living with an open heart. It can be painful. It has been painful for me from time to time, but in the sweep of my life, and I'm not at the end, but it's been long and full. The benefits of living with an open heart have so far outweighed the costs or the harms. So take that chance.
It's a richer life when you open your heart to people who might not be in your normal environment. Might to reach out to people and say, I want to learn, enriches yourself. It makes for a more, it adds context to your own life.
I think so.
Yeah, very well said. Okay, so here's a question. According to Democratic candidate training organization Run for Something, more than 26,000 young people have signed up to run for office since the pandemic began in March 2020. And 11,000 of those signed up just since the beginning of this year. This person would love to hear the governor's thoughts about how this growing movement for new voices among elected policymakers, the importance of representation, and how we can build capacity for voices most marginalized to claim their seat at the table.
I love that question. First of all, Run for Something is one of a handful of just fabulous groups that have been intentional about encouraging talent that we know, by the way, exists in every American community to step up and contribute through elective office to political and civic life. And I think one thing to be clear with people is that while it is incredibly important that we have people who make a career of that, it isn't necessary. That is that if people have something to contribute and they bring alongside the talent and the insights and the experience, some humility, then there is a place for them to make a difference in public life. I'll say, just as an aside, and this really isn't I'm not sucking up. We need to deal with what it is we pay people we ask to serve in government, because that itself is a barrier to a whole lot of Black and brown and other young people, frankly, and needlessly so. But that's another topic. And then I think, in this, I remember that I'm going to try to tread lightly here, Representative, but I remember when I ran the first time, the reaction at the beginning by many who were in government was, nice guy, but you have a lot of nerve. You can't cut the line. It's not your turn. Mm-hmm. And I understand that as a human thing, as a human reaction. I don't understand that in a democracy. I think office holders, and it's easy, I guess, for me to say because I'm not one now, but I think office holders should feel the hot breath of their competition on their necks all the time. I think also one should be willing to run and to serve, willing to lose, which is to say, to me, it's not just about having the job, it's what you do with it. What do you want it for? And if there's someone else, not just somebody who has, better rhetoric, cooler suits, or whatever that stuff, not just somebody who says, I'm young and therefore I want it. I mean, fresh ideas, new ways of problem solving, new ways of making our institutions function better for all of the citizens. And I think it's possible to be competitive without tearing the competition down if you are an insurgent or if you are an office holder. So I am hopeful about all this, and probably in some respects unwisely so, because I will say sensationalism seems to be the way of politics these days. So what I'm talking about is not that, and I hope instead we see more mature and serious competition of ideas than sometimes we do.
That's a great answer. All right, well, I have one more question. I think we'll have time for one more. And I have another one if we do end up having time for another.
I'll try to be brief. I apologize to those
no.
in the queue.
Your answers, you just talk, you keep talking. It's fine. It's so substantive, and I love what you have to say. So I want you to be able to contribute complete thoughts.
Thank you.
As someone who was born of white privilege, who rises up against social injustice, how do people of color look at someone who is white advocating for them? How can someone who recognizes their white privilege do better? And what do people of color need for those who do recognize their white privilege to better understand so we can effectively join the cause?
Wow.
That's a great question.
Yeah, all of those questions are great. So the first thing I want to say is that please don't hear me as presuming to speak for all Black people. There are a wide range of views and experiences, and probably a wide range of answers to that question. I think that part of living with an open heart is giving up a little bit of anxiety about what the reaction to your open heart is going to be, and taking the step anyway. And I think that bridge building starts with listening. And so the folks who come, as they say, into the community with all the answers, and let me tell you, at Milton Academy and places like it, I had a marvelous experience, but I met a whole lot of people who had very, very clear ideas on a whole range of social issues with a fraction of the experience to justify the certainty they had about their ideas. And I just think there's something about showing up in community and asking community what they need that is a gesture of respect, and also is a great way to build allyship and to work on the things that actually matter to people. And that will vary from community to community. So again, this point about humility. And then I think, you know, as you start those sorts of relationships, you got to be willing to make the same claim on the people you're trying to help,
Mhm.
right? That they show some curiosity, that we show some curiosity about you and what you're worried about. Why is it that it is so hard to have a conversation? I think, is it Newton that's been in the news? Generally liberal thinking Newton has been all kinds of controversy about affordable housing in Newton. Why is that so hard? What's underneath that? I'm not implying that it is all nefarious or seedy, but how do we talk about that? Can you say to me, person of white privilege, why is it I can't go to school at that suburban high school, or afford to live in a unit, in your community? Why is it that doesn't happen? And why hasn't it happened? And being able to have those hard conversations without presuming the answers or presuming the bad faith of the person offering the answer on both sides is part of what we just have to get through as we make this business of justice and of integration personal.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, your perspective here again is so valuable, and your ability to really listen and to tease out the issues that really need to be addressed that are often brushed over, by assumptions, I think is so important. And just that you took the time to share with us tonight your perspectives, I think it gives us all a fresh look at things. And
That's kind of you. But I want to be clear, I'm still learning.
we all are.
It's a journey for me too.
Mhm. We all are. And as long as we keep our hearts open and continue to learn, then I think there's hope. And I think, we can have, the society that we all envision together. I don't know. I think, that you were such a thoughtful leader of our state, and somebody that I was proud to support very early on. And
So early that I showed up a day in advance for the fundraiser that you would reach. Or was it a week in advance? I can't remember.
It was a week in advance. You came by. And then I appreciate your enthusiasm then, but it was the wrong day and I had nobody to introduce you to. But as you, grew into the position, I was so proud of your cerebral approach to coming to yes with people who disagree. And the legislature is a place of conflict. That's why the issues are before us. And the three chamber, the Senate, the House, and the governor, it's a notorious, high level conflict, and you navigated it. And we did some extraordinary things as a state, and much to be proud of. And I think, you bring a certain perspective to this that in this moment is so important. I'm so glad to hear that you're still working in this space and you're trying to bring people together and come to yes, so we can go forward together.
Well,
So
thank you. I'm not gonna give up on this Commonwealth or on this country or on my fellow man. And I've seen some dark behaviors, and I've heard a lot of and seen a lot of disappointing things, but I have also seen acts of grace, and I know we're capable of it.
I agree. And I think as long as we see each other as human and we respect each other's humanity, once you start there, you have something to build on. So Governor, I thank you
Thank you.
for joining
Thank
us
you. Be with
tonight.
you, Rep.
And I look forward to come to the North Shore once it's safe to gather again.
Once I'm vaccinated and yes, I will do so. I like that. Thank you.
And everybody that I have to say the questions in the chat box were extraordinary. So thank you everybody who contributed questions. I didn't get to all of them obviously, but thank you for those thoughtful questions. I don't know if am I supposed to say goodbye to everybody? Barbara, would you like to return and just close out here, or shall I just wish everybody a good night? Anybody?
Yeah.
There's Barbara.
Hi,
Hi, Barbara.
thank you, Representative Ehrlich, and thank you so much, Governor. And thank you to all the attendees at home for participating in this important event. And of course, our heartfelt gratitude to Governor Deval Patrick and Representative Lori Ehrlich for participating in tonight's speaker series, Fireside Chat, as well as to our wonderful committee, Bev Kahn, Mimi Nelson-Oliver, Jerry and Patricia Kreitzer, Keiko Zoll, Joel Green, and the unbelievable Barry Stein. You all helped make this program possible, and we really appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts.
Please join us on Sunday, April 18th at 4 p.m. for the second part of our series, What Does Judaism Teach Us About Racial Justice, with Rav Teferet Berenbaum as our guest speaker, moderated by Amy Gold, head of school at Epstein Hillel School in Marblehead. Please go to shirathayam.org to learn more and register for this event. Thank you again and have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.